thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about DevOps. It's not a new topic, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with DevOps, but just a quick recap and an overview of how the Inflectra platform plays into DevOps and how we integrate with other tools. That'll be the slide where after that, we're going into a live demo, and I'll be showing you how you integrate SpiraPlan with GitHub, GitLab, and Azure DevOps. And we'll talk a little bit about the end about how we can bring all that together in what we call value stream mapping or scaled agile type of functionality, where we can bring those different tools together. So with that, let's get going. So just a bit about me, Adam Sandman, been a program since the age of 10. So I'm currently the CEO of Inflectra, one of the founders, but I really have a background in technology and programming. And although I don't code on our products anymore, I do like to play around with some of the new stuff. And so write Spira apps and do fun things. So I do like to keep my hands dirty in the code. And so this is a great presentation because we're going to be dealing with everything from program management and traceability all the way down to code and see how it all really fits together. So before we get into that, just a quick background for those who are new to the company and the product suite. At Inflectra, our mission is to help your mission, which is delivering critical software without sacrificing agility or compliance. If you look at most of our clients, they work in the industries where things mustn't fail. And those are the sort of the high assurance industries like aerospace, medical, utilities, supply chain, finance, banking, insurance, automotive, aerospace, defense. All of those industries have one thing in common. Typically, they can't go, or even governments, things can't fail. The systems mustn't go down even for a second. And that requires a large amount of quality and process and traceability. On the other hand, we're all trying to do more with less. Things like AI, Agile, DevOps, CI/CD allow us to work more efficiently and faster. And with Spira and the Inflectra suite, we can bring this all together. So we want to help you deliver at speed, at scale, and have real-time visibility so you can have it all. You can have quality and speed at the same time. And that helps all the different roles that are involved in software delivery have a unified view of what they're doing, work together more efficiently, and avoid misunderstandings or rework. And from that, this is our platform that helps us deliver that. And today we'll be focusing on the SpiraPlan, which is our enterprise view of Spira. We do also have Spira Team and Spira Test that are reduced functionality additions for those who are just getting started with the product. We also have our data synchronization platform, which we'll be using to hook up parts of Azure DevOps, GitHub, and GitLab that lets us synchronize data. On today's demo, we will not be covering in detail Spira apps or Spira Capture, but they are involved in the testing process and the validation process. And we'll talk and mention about Rapise and Chronodesk, which are involved in the DevOps lifecycle, but not the focus of today's demo, but they are involved tangentially. So with that, I want to also mention that as a company, we are very committed to an open ecosystem. We integrate with the major platforms that are out there. Today, we'll be demonstrating the integration with the Microsoft platform, which really consists of either or both Azure DevOps and GitHub. In many ways, they're quite similar. And then there's also the GitLab alternative, which is being used a lot by people running on Google or AWS. We also integrate with things like Salesforce and ServiceNow, Atlassian Suite, things like Bitbucket and Jira, although that isn't the focus of today's webinar, but we do have those integrations as well, plus a whole bunch of other integrations that we're not showing today. We also have lots of migration tools, so if you like what you see today and you're not a current customer, and you're using something like TestRail or Practice or Jama, we do have migration tools to smooth your journey onto the Inflectra platform. And we've had many customers in the last 2 or 3 months make migrations from those different tools. So let's go now into today's subject matter, which is DevOps. And DevOps, really, it's not something new now, but maybe 5 years ago, this was a new and revolutionary concept, which was how do we make operations and the IT infrastructure run at the speed of agile and development? So when the Agile Manifesto came along, it talked about how we could streamline requirements, stories, testing, continuous integration, getting from ideas to code and tested, obviously, and integrated in the fastest way possible. So kind of the CI piece. But it didn't do much on the CD piece. How do we deploy things? We were still dealing with virtual machines, physical servers, bare metal, deployment and IT with a bottleneck. So the ops side of DevOps, which is really where I think we see the innovation, was how do we make infrastructure work as code? And things like, the AWS, Azure, GCP have infrastructure as code. You can provision machines. You can go, serverless containers. There's lots and lots of different ways now we can release software in a much faster manner. Simultaneously, we can now embed telemetry and other tools like to do monitoring. We can do real-time production rollbacks potentially. So really the ability to configure and monitor in production, as well as releasing more quickly and more efficiently, is really the hallmark of DevOps. And really what we're doing is integrating development, software engineering, QA, and operations into one integrated delivery mechanism, which is represented by that infinity loop on the right. And the reason I have the diagram on the left is sometimes people will say, where is QA? And it's kind of embedded in verify, but it's also throughout. I would say that testing is in verify, but I would say QA and quality is actually throughout. If you can't create and plan if you don't have good requirements and good plans and good training and good team members and good knowledge. You can't package, release, and configure if you haven't got good release processes, and you can't monitor if you haven't got a good telemetry and observability infrastructure. So quality, in my mind, is throughout the entire infinity loop, although testing, you could argue, might be more concentrated in the verify piece. Some of that's controversial, but certainly you have to have QA embedded into DevOps. So let's look at the elements of DevOps, everything from plan to monitor. And in that infinity loop, which I've kind of flattened out into a flow chart, how do the different tools fit together? So in today's demonstration, we'll be looking at the different tools, and we're going to start with planning and how we can use SpiraPlan to put together requirements, user stories, how you can take those to create tasks and work items that will show how you can send those to tools like Azure DevOps, how we can push items to GitHub or GitLab as well, how we can then do the testing and verification. I've got some automated tests I'll be running in a pipeline to show you how we do some of the testing. For UI and API testing, you might want to use Rapise from Inflectra. I'm not covering that today. That would be a separate webinar topic, how we can use Rapise for UI testing. I'll be dealing today primarily in code level testing, some sample unit tests that we have. And then how you package it up, release it, configure it. Most of that's going to be done in a combination of SpiraPlan plus the appropriate tool. And then how we monitor and bring it all together, that's done through the business level monitoring is done through SpiraPlan, where you can see all the different tools rolling up their reporting to give us traceability and reporting and visibility. And then Chronodesk is our IT service management tool that if you want to monitor inbound service requests, you can also connect that up to your work stream. So that way, when customers have issues, those work items get forwarded back into Spira based on customer issues. So you release into production, there are customer service issues that are now coming in from production. They can filter through our IT service management solution into SpiraPlan. I won't be demoing that today. I'll be focusing more on the SpiraPlan plus GitLab plus Azure plus GitLab. As I mentioned, there are other tools we integrate with that are out of scope today, like Jira, but again, all could fit into that ecosystem. So for today's live application demos, I'm going to be showing you 3 different things for each of the different tools. So I'll be showing you, first of all, how do we synchronize work items? And work items is a term used in Azure DevOps, but it means things like stories, tasks, and instance issues, bugs, enhancements, all of those items. And we can synchronize those with Azure DevOps and to a lesser degree, because they don't have as much functionality, GitHub and GitLab, and I'll show you that. That uses our data synchronization framework and system. The second thing we'll show you is how do you connect source code? I want to view the code from Azure DevOps or GitHub or GitLab into Spira, and the answer is it's quite easy because they're all using Git. And the third thing is how do I integrate the pipelines? And this works a little bit differently in each of the tools, and I'll talk about how those are set up and how those work. And to view the code, I'll be using Visual Studio. I've got a Git client called Git Kraken that I'm using, but you can use any Git client. Visual Studio Code has them. Tortoise, pick your favorite tool, the command line, whatever you like. I'll be showing that today. Okay, so the last piece then is once you've done all that, I've got all these different teams and tools. Now, in a real environment, in a large company, this is not actually, if you go back a second, this is not actually an unrealistic situation. We've got many clients where they are using a multitude of tools, and especially if you throw Jira into the mix as well, you may have a company that has people using GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, and Jira, with Jira probably with a mixture of GitHub or GitLab, or maybe Bitbucket, all in the same organization and potentially working on similar but related products together. And the problem has always been, I've got all these teams using their favorite tools, and it's hard to change their favorite tools. But how do I get a visibility and a view of all this information together? Well, SpiraPlan lets you do that. So the last part of the demo, I'll show you how that part works. And what that does is it brings it together. So each of those different products that we'll be using, will work on a different team and can roll up into what we call at SpiraPlan as a program. And a program in SpiraPlan can have what are called capabilities. And that's like a program backlog for those who are used to scaled agile framework or other scaled agile methodologies. But basically, it's a bunch of business level ideas, features, goals, objectives things that have business value that are being managed at a program level, and you can connect those to the different user stories and features at the individual product level, and then roll those up. And that way you can see when is value delivered. Because if I can't deliver an end-to-end solution that maybe contains, multiple different systems together, until all those different systems are finished and working together, I haven't actually delivered value to the customer. For example, if I had an online banking application and there's a mobile banking client, there's a back-end web service that I need, and then there's a core banking, mainframe application, and all three are being enhanced to deliver a capability, I could have three different teams using three different tool sets, but all of them have to deliver the key user stories that we need together so I can release that program functionality. And so in SpiraPlan, you could have each of those different teams with those different tool sets that I've shown you before, each working independently with their own backlogs at the product level, and we can roll those together into a program backlog, and we can then track when is that integrated set of functionality available. And also, if there's delays on one of the teams, it lets the program managers and the product owners have a conversation around maybe if we reprioritize the backlog on this one product, we can deliver that one user story that the entire program is waiting for instead of a different user story that maybe is not on the critical path, and thus deliver the value to the customer earlier. Lets you do that without micromanaging the team, which is, of course, the hallmark of an anti-pattern for Agile. So we want to give the teams autonomy as per Agile, but you also want some degree of program level coordination and orchestration so we can deliver value to the customers. And we'll show you that. And that lets you use the dashboard views that we have in SpiraPlan to bring that information together. So you can see across those different tools, here's the end result. I want to know what's on track, what's behind, when am I delivering value to my customers? Is it on track or behind? And here you can see it's quite behind. Everything's gone red. But you can see what's being delivered and when. And we can even then drill it down to a product view where I can see for each of my 4 different products, using these different tool chains, what's behind and what's on track. So if you're the CIO managing all these different teams, this gives you that top-down view, which is all real-time data, so you can see what's going on and make decisions and help, maybe prioritize things a little bit differently. First of all, hopefully you've seen Spira before, but this is SpiraPlan. And this particular SpiraPlan has been connected to these different systems. So I've created a program called Data Sync Demo Projects. It's not the most original name. And under that, we've got one product in Spira for Azure DevOps, one for GitHub, one for GitLab, and we actually have one for Jira, though we're not going to be going into that today, but we do have that available as well. And as I mentioned, we'll be talking about 3 different integration points. We'll be talking about synchronization of work items, we'll be talking about code, and we'll be talking about pipelines. And we'll do it system by system first, then we'll come back at the end to bring it all together. So one other thing to mention is this is kind of the end user's view. This is the dashboard we're going to come to. But from an IT admin standpoint, the way all this works is we use our data synchronization framework. That's over here. And you can see we've got these different tools integrated in real time, and they are synchronizing the work items as we speak. And I've got over here my 3 different systems. These are all live. This is Azure DevOps. This is GitHub. And this is GitLab. And occasionally I'll say GitHub and GitLab backwards. So if I say that, just excuse me. And we've got this all 3 been integrated in the 3 different ways. And so from a synchronization standpoint, just to show a little bit of how I set this up, I've set up the different integrations here for synchronization, and I've mapped the different products. So I've mapped my GitHub project to GitHub, I've mapped my GitLab project to GitLab, and I've mapped my ADO project to ADO, and done the same thing for Jira. Now, in a real project situation, you probably have multiple teams using GitHub. So when you expand this arrow, you'd see 4 or 5 different teams all using GitHub, and maybe you've got a bunch using GitLab, and that maybe that's all you're using, and you see 3 or 4 using GitLab. So that's how you can tell which is using which of the different systems. The other thing we've set up is we've gone into the source code management system, which is over here, and we've connected Git. We've created a Git profile, and we've mapped that to our different projects using the different Git URLs. And we'll talk about that when we actually look at the code. That's how we integrate the code side of things. And the last piece is the pipelines. And the pipeline integration, for the most part, is being done inside of the tool, inside of GitHub and inside of GitHub. We've set up the appropriate connectors, which I'll show you. But inside of Spira, we do have options for GitHub and GitLab that use Spira apps. And I mentioned Spira apps before. That's our plugin framework. And so I've gone into Spira apps and I've enabled the GitHub and GitLab pipeline integration. The way ADO works is a little bit different. It doesn't need one of these. It runs as a plugin inside of GitHub or inside of ADO. And so these are now activated. And then if I go to my different projects, I've enabled them on the different project. Okay, so that's some of the setup. So now let's talk about the functionality. So first of all, let's start with Azure DevOps. So to do that, the Zoom window is right in the way. Hold on a sec for that. I'm just going to hide all this. There we go. So let's dive into Azure DevOps first of all. So Azure DevOps offers the richest actually set of integrations that we have. So inside of Spira, we can synchronize requirements, we can synchronize tasks, and we can synchronize incidents. And the way the integration works is if I was to go into Azure DevOps and I create a user story, so if I go into my boards and I go to my work items, which is right here, if I go in, I can go in here and I can create a user story or an epic or a feature in Azure DevOps. And when I create that, it gets automatically created by the synchronization into Spira. And if I click on the hyperlink, I can see when it creates that, it actually adds a link to Spira. So I can click on that link, or I can actually just go in here and browse my requirements list, and I can see it in here. And it's in fact right here. So I'm going to click on that one. So this is my Azure DevOps user story. And I would see that it has the name, it has the description, and this there isn't one, so it defaults it to something because we typically want a description in Spira. And if there are any attachments in ADO, it would bring those over as well. There weren't any. So, but even so, it does create a link to ADO. So if I wanted to open up this user story, I can click on the link, and then I can go into ADO. And if I'm in ADO, I can click on the link to Spira. So it works in both directions, making it really easy to navigate back and forth between the two different items. So that's really cool. And then what I can do in Spira is I can then link it to my test cases. And I've taken this reuser story, I've linked it to some manual and automated tests. So now in Spira, we can see this user story from Azure DevOps. What's the test coverage? Has it passed or failed? For manual tests, we would run these in ADO. So we can do that. In fact, let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'll go to my test cases and I'll go to my manual tests. And I'm going to click on this one. And I'm going to execute the test in Spira. And when I do that, I'm going to now run it, and I'm going to push a defect, an issue, an incident into a bug, in this case, probably into Azure DevOps. I can choose the release. Now, these iterations you see here, these are literally the ones mapped to the iterations in Azure DevOps. So if you're not familiar with what that is, if you go here, these are the iterations, and these are synchronized between the two different tools. So you can see here my iterations. Here are my iterations, we synchronize them, and we can also pick a build. These builds are generated by the ADO pipelines. I'm not going to bother right now, but I can link it to a build in ADO if I want, if this particular test is specific to a build that was released. I'll hit next, and we're going to pass a couple of steps. And let's say we get to the fourth step and we get an error. So I'll put in, error on the page, and I'll put in a screenshot of that error. I'm just going to grab the GitHub homepage, pretend that's my error screen, just to save a bit of time, put that in there, go to incidents, and we'll log a defect and say, error on the page, priority is high, bug, and I hit fail, and that's it. So I failed my test, done my manual test, hit OK, and if I go into Spira, I'll see the test has failed. If I go back to my user story list, which again comes in for Azure DevOps, that particular story here was linked to that test case. It's now gone red before it was yellow for blocked. So that's updated nicely. So I've got my real-time test coverage view of my requirements. If I go into my incidents, I can see my new defect is logged right here. And it hasn't yet got an Azure DevOps ID. That means it hasn't synchronized yet. Our synchronization runs every few minutes, so it hasn't yet run, and so that's okay. So if I go into my task view, while we're waiting for that to synchronize, these are tasks that we create in Azure DevOps, and they can appear in Spira, and we can link these to our requirements as well. And so we have different use cases depending on the clients. Some of our clients, they want to write all their user stories and all the requirements in Azure DevOps and just use Spira test for the testing. So they can have the user stories be generated in Spira, and they can then in ADO and have the user stories come into Spira and then write the test cases. There are other clients of ours that want to use the requirements management functionality of Spira, but they want to have the developers work in ADO. So in which case, they can create the requirements in Spira, and as the users create their tasks and stories in ADO, those come over as tasks, and they can then go into the task, and they can link it to a requirement in Spira instead. So depending on the use case, or there are other clients who might want to use the tasks and the stories in Azure DevOps and have them both synchronize over. We support all those different use cases. So if you go to this example here, this is a task that came in from Azure DevOps. It's a development task. It's linked to this user story or requirement. It's also come in and it's been therefore linked to Azure DevOps. If I go to the attachments tab, there's my link and I can bring that up in ADO over here. And if I go into ADO and add a comment to the task or to the requirement, it will actually update Inspira as well. So let's say this task makes a lot of sense. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But that's okay for now. Okay, and if we go back into Spira, well, we've been waiting. Let's go and see. The defects is in this tab. This is my defect. If I click on it, yep, so that's still waiting to synchronize. So as the synchronization runs, it will then add this to Azure DevOps. And let's go into Azure DevOps now. We're waiting for that to synchronize. You can see all the work items in here. And you can see we have all the different items. So we have the user stories, we have the defects, we have tasks if there are any, like here's that task we just saw. So everything you see comes in here. And if I make a change in Azure DevOps, like I resolve it, add a comment, those will update back. Now the synchronization currently, the way it works today is the requirements and user stories and tasks, they all go into Spira, so they're one directional. So you can create them in Azure DevOps and update them in Azure DevOps and add comments and so on, and that will update Spira. However, the defect or the issue tracking, that's the incidents, bugs, enhancements, anything that in Spira lives in the incident tracker, those are all fully bidirectional. So you can log them in Azure DevOps, you can log them in Spira, and they will synchronize in both directions. And let's just see. Let's do a page refresh. So where's the demo? Oh, there we go. There's our error just came in. If I click on it, that was the error we just logged. And the attachment is right here. So it does appear. If you remember, it was the GitHub page. It wasn't a real error. So there we go. Oh, and yeah. Where's the close button? Hold on. There's a close icon. There you go. No, yes, there's a close icon in the picture, which makes it hard to see which is the real close button. So that's my defect that was logged. If I go back now into Spira and do a refresh on this exact same item we saw before, we'll now see it has been assigned an Azure DevOps number, and now it's going to synchronize in both directions and updates and not duplicate or anything like that. And if I go into the attachments, we'll see it added the hyperlink automatically to Azure as well. So that's a good example of how I can take an item in Spira that was logged, push it to Azure DevOps, and similarly, if I push new requirements or new tasks in ADO, they will come over into Spira. Okay, so that's the work item tracking. There's a lot more functionality, what synchronizes, but that just as an overview, we're basically bringing work items from Azure DevOps and pushing work items to Azure DevOps and then updating them. The next part is the code. So the code part is a little bit simpler in some ways. We go into the source code repository in Spira, and there's your code. And to do that, we basically went into the administration and we basically went into our source code connector. And all we need to do is put in the correct URL for Azure DevOps. Now it's a Git connection. We log into it with our Git login and password and an API key in this case. And once we've done that, we can now browse the code that's in Git inside of Azure DevOps. And this is the same code. And you've got to see there's some Python code here. You can preview it. Click on the history. You can even see the change history if there is any. Oh, I guess there wasn't any. Let me see. Oh, that was adding the initial code. So if I go into my commit view, you can view the code, and we can even see if there's any changes made. So here we go. We made a change, and we tagged it to a test set. Click on it. You can see inspired codes that change. Oh, let me see. Maybe it didn't change. Okay, let's do. There you go. That's the check. There you go. So we did make a change. So we were changing the code to force it. So we've got code in Azure DevOps that's now visible in Spira. So that way the testing team who may not have access to Azure DevOps, they can see all the code. Or if you just want to browse the code and you haven't got access to the repository, you can view it here within Spira. And you can tag any of these commits with the artifacts in Spira, and that will make the association. So if we scroll down to that one that I had before, I had tagged this particular commit with a Spira test set ID right here. I could do that right here and see it. Now, the other thing is, we do have plugins for the IDEs. So if you go into Visual Studio, we do have plugins for Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, and for IntelliJ. So you can even make the tagging of those commits even easier. So the third piece then is the pipelines. So we've got, in this case, what do we have? We actually have in Azure DevOps, inside of Spira, we have commits that relate to a unit test. So we've deployed one of our unit test frameworks into Azure DevOps. So we've got basically a Python set of Python code, and we've got in the test harness, we've basically got a sample of a unit test using that's going to generate a JUnit report file, which looks like this. So it's a JUnit report file, which is coming out of a unit test harness. So pretend we've got some unit tests that are running. They generate this unit test output file, and we're now going to use our XUnit integration, which comes off our website. And this plugin is Python, and it basically reads the unit test file, and it reports back into Spira using the configuration in this configuration file. And so that lives in the Azure DevOps pipeline. If I go into Azure DevOps, I can go into my repositories and I can see the exact same thing here. I can see I've got my YAML file, which is my pipeline, and I've got my test. That's my JUnit. JUnit. This is the JUnit code that runs, that basically reads the report file, and it's going to report back into Spira. So I've got a unit test integration running in a pipeline, and the pipeline lives here, and we're going to run it on Ubuntu. And it's basically got a Python script and it automatically runs whenever we commit new code and will generate a pipeline result. So how do we trigger it? Well, we can force it to run in ADO, but the simplest thing is to actually go into the code, which is over here, ADO code, and I'm going to take that code and I'm going to force a commit. So what I'm going to do is I go in here and I'm just going to change a comment. So let's go into here and, comment added to force a build. So I'm basically committing a YAML file. I go into here, for those familiar with Git, I'm going to take that change and I'm going to commit it into the main branch, and that's going to force so stage the file, test commit to run pipeline, pretend I'm making a real change, push that, and that pushes, oops, oh daisy. I do have that. Okay, so if we got it, that's okay. Use my handy dandy password manager. So I need my oops. And that pushed. So I've now pushed that code change into production. And in real life, you'd have a dev branch, you'd have a code review and all that good stuff. So we wouldn't, and we do a pull request. I'm just keeping it simple. I'm just pushing straight into main. And so that is now pushed into main. And if you go into the code, you'll see that there's a new code inside of Azure DevOps. Right here, there's my comment, add force build. And if I go into pipelines, you'll see it ran just now. And why did it run? Oh, it's running right now. You can see the icon, it's running. So what it's doing, just for those who are not as familiar with Azure DevOps, it's taking my unit tests, running them. There's no code, there's no actual code change. It thinks it's a code change though, so it's running the unit tests. And once it's finished, it's going to take those unit test results and send them back into Spira. And it just marked as green. So now if I go back into Spira, to my Azure DevOps project, I can go into my test runs and I will see the test run, 19th of March. These are my test run. It ran my entire unit test harness, and we've got that report file that we have has some passes and fails in it deliberately to make it interesting. So we got some passes. So here's a pass, nothing reported, and it's got some screenshots in the report. So you can see there's my screenshot of a login. And if I go back, there's a home page. So that's my unit test that ran. If I go to one that failed, which is more interesting, you'll see this is the failure. It expected the word librarian and found the word borrower. So there was an error on the page. This is a JUnit file, probably running like fictitiously running a Selenium script or a Playwright script. If I go into attachments, you can see there's my login, my homepage. So you can see right here. So we've got in Spira, we've got the ability to see the tests that ran. Now, the other thing that's really cool is these tests ran as part of a pipeline. And inside of Spira, I can go into my releases view. And in here, I think it's iteration one we've linked it to. I go into my build view, and you can see here, we actually have the build from Azure DevOps. So first of all, we have the build from the ADO integration that ran. So there's the build, gives the pass or fail of the build itself, the code build, and then our XUnit integration also reports back the build for the test activities, and it gave us back the fact that it failed because we've got one blocked and one failure, and it gave us a test were ran, one failed, one errored, and one was skipped. So we've now got the pipeline integration running back and the test results reporting back as well. So that's how with an ADO, we can see work items, we can see code, and we can see builds or pipelines. So very easy to do. The next example is with GitHub and GitLab. So just to keep us going on time, let's go into GitHub first. And now GitHub integration is a little bit different. The integration with GitHub on the work item side is limited to the incidents currently. So in the incident view, I can create incidents in Spira for tests. And when I log an incident in Spira, it's going to appear in GitHub. If I create an incident in GitHub, it's going to appear in Spira. So it's bidirectional incident synchronization. So for example, let's look at this one. Here's an incident I logged previously in Spira. Again, this could be during a testing activity or it could just be logged directly. When it logs into Spira, it adds a GitHub ID, it adds an attachment, which is the link to GitHub, and it also has any association to things like requirements or test cases. And if I go to another example here, this is another one we logged. This is from an example where I ran it during a test result. Here you can see there's the test case, the description, the expected result, the actual result. This is from a test, and this also got pushed into GitHub. So let me click on the association. You can see this is linked to a test case and a requirement in Spira, and I want the development team now to fix that. I go to my attachments tab, click on that. It's now going to open it in GitHub, and there is my issue. So just like we saw in ADO, I can see the work items in both systems. Okay, great. Now let's talk about in the GitHub context, how does the code integration work? Well, it works very similar. If we go into source code, we can now see all of the code. It's a very similar repository, and it lives over here. And if I go to GitKraken, I've got the repository over here for GitHub. And it's a very similar thing. I've got my Git repository. I can view all the code. I can view the source code. I can view it in Spira. I can view it in GitHub. I can see the history. I can see the changes. If I go to my commit view, I can view the commits. We can even synchronize pull requests. Here you can see all my commits. If I click on this one, this is an interesting one because I've tagged this particular commit with a requirement. So here I can see we made this code commit. We've implemented this user story in this requirement. We've carried out this task. We have visibility from that. If I go into the file view, I can see which files were involved in it. If I click on a file, I can even see what changed, if anything changed. Yep, here we go. We did make some actual changes. So I've got this code view within Spira for GitHub. And if I want to do the pipeline, it's exactly the same. There's two differences though, or really. The one is that I can, first of all, just like I did with ADO, I can trigger the commit from the code side. All I would do is go into Visual Studio Code, open up, in this case, the GitHub repository, which is this one, and I can open up the code and make a change and commit the branch and push it or merge it in if it's in a different branch. And this particular integration which runs inside of GitHub, it would run automatically just like I saw before. And if you want to look at what it looks like, it's in the root. Actually, it's in the GitHub folder. It actually looks like, I think it's this one here. Yeah, this is it here. It's basically a job that runs. It looks for changes in the repository. Once it detects a change in the master branch or the main branch, it installs Python, and then it runs our Python unit test framework, just like we showed before, and it sends the results back to Spira. So this is what's actually running inside of GitHub. But there's one other thing I can do. I've enabled a Spira app, and the Spira app is really good if I want to be able to kick off the pipeline right now. So sometimes you want the code to run automatically and the pipeline to build, and that's great. But suppose you've got a test activity you want to run again because maybe the testing environment was down, but there's no code change. Well, you've got the advantage with GitHub in that you can also trigger it from Spira's side. To do that, we go into releases. We've picked the release that we've linked to GitHub, and we go into GitHub Spira app, and we say run action. And just to show you what will happen, it's going to create a new build here. Right now, the latest one is the 15th of March. So I just go in here, hey, run action, and it's going out to GitHub, and it's told it to start the pipeline. And it's going to start running. If I go here over to GitHub, I'm going to go over to my actions, and you will see it's running right here. Execute unit test. This one here is running. And while it's running, I'm just going to show you a little bit behind the scenes how it works. Regardless of whether you kick it off from Spira or if the code is being pushed and it runs automatically. If I go into settings, how it's integrating is it's using the webhook. So we have a webhook that we've set up, and that's how the integration is done. And everything you see is documented on our website. So this is a little bit different to Azure DevOps because in Azure DevOps, we actually have a pipeline plugin. So in Azure DevOps, just in case you're curious how that works, we actually have a plugin for it. And we actually have a special job that we use. So we have a special plugin in the pipelines which you use. So that's a little bit different from the GitHub. GitHub, we're using a webhook. In ADO, we're using a plugin that's on the ADO marketplace. Okay, well, that's running. I think it's finished. So let's go and see if the action is finished. Yep, it's finished. And now if we go back into Spira over here in the GitHub project, and we go to the refresh the page, we've now got, and refresh this, we'll see we've now got a new build from the 19th of March. And if I click on it here, you'll see the build failed. And why did it fail? The code itself was correct, but we had a failure on the testing side. So the code compiled correctly, the XML file was generated, but the XML file, which is the unit test results from our fake set of unit tests, failed and blocked, just like we saw before. And if we click on it like before, we'll see we've got details of the test results right here from our pipeline, right here in Spira. So we can see right here in Spira what failed, why it failed, how it failed, when it failed, and what pipeline it failed on. And we can see the same thing in GitHub as well. So that's GitHub. Well, what about GitLab? Well, GitLab is it's very similar. So just the integrations, the same 3 integrations that exist in GitLab. If I go into my GitLab project, I can first of all go into my requirements. I can write requirements. Here they are. I can link those to my test cases and run manual tests. When I run my manual tests, if I have any defects, we can push those defects to GitLab. So let's take an example here. Here's a defect that I created during testing. And if I click on the attachment link, it will now open in GitLab. So whereas the one before opened in GitHub, now it opens in GitLab. So the great thing is I can be in Spira and I can see actually everything. I can see GitHub, GitLab, and ADO all in one set of screens. And every time I want to click on something to drill down a bit further, it will take me out to the item directly in the appropriate tool. And this is GitLab here. So again, bidirectional incident synchronization. You can log an issue in GitHub. Here's one that was logged in started life in GitLab. Here's one that started life in Spira. Whichever direction you do it in, we can synchronize the comments as well. So the good news is you can log it in Spira, add a comment in GitLab, add it in GitLab, add a comment in Spira. So whatever way you want to work, the 2 teams can work together and it's really seamless. And Spira has the advantage of also of concurrent licenses. So if you don't have licenses in GitHub or GitLab for your entire team, only for the team that's working in that tool, that way your managers can work in, say, Spira and still see everything and still make comments and make changes, and will push over to the other tool. You don't have to have license for every single person in GitHub, GitLab, and ADO for every project, which quickly gets expensive. So that's the work item synchronization. How do the pipelines work? And the code, very similar. Let's look at source code. So here in the source code view, this is now GitLab, but it looks very similar. We can see we've got the different branches. I've got the same, I've got my code file. The one difference here is I've got a different YAML file because it's running with GitLab, so it looks a little bit different. This is what it looks like here. It's broadly similar. It's got the Python code. It's going to check for a change in the code base. It's going to install Python. It's going to run my unit test framework on the results of the unit tests right here. And it's syntactically a bit different, but logically very similar. And in fact, I used AI to help me do that as I'm more familiar with GitHub, but it worked pretty easily. And if I go into my code base in GitHub or GitLab, I will see the same thing. Go over here, go to my code, and you can see there's all my code. There's my YAML file. There's my unit tests in the test section. So everything that we had before, we can see in Spira is here. There's my tests. There's my unit tests. There's my unit test integration. So everything that we saw in GitHub or ADO, very similar setup, but now it's in GitLab. And if I want to make a change and run a pipeline and get the test results, just like I could do before, I can either go in and commit a change to one of these files. That would trigger the webhook, which is set up similarly, or I can go into Spira and just like I could with GitHub, I can go into the releases section. I can go to the appropriate release and I can use my GitLab plugin, run that pipeline. Oh, I did change the URL. Hold on. Oops. Hold on. The demo effects. Whoops. Well, so let's do it the other way just to get it to work. We'll go and I think I've changed the URL out before I did the demo. So I changed the URL here. Not a problem. What I can do is if I go into my repository, which is down here, and I'm going to go change let's just add a comment to my file. Just say, added comment, AMS, my initials. We save that. We go over here, we go to GitLab, and we take the change to trigger pipeline, stage all changes, commit, push. Yep, that pushed to GitLab. And if I go into GitLab and I go to my workflows, here we go, pipelines. It's running. You can see it's running right here. It's got the blue icon. Um, I recently changed the GitLab repository to work under a company your account. I need to update the URL in the Spire app. I'll do that afterwards. So you can trigger it either from code like I'm doing now or from the Spira app, whichever way it gets triggered. Once it's finished, it will report back into Spira. So let's see if it's finished. No, it's still running. And while it's running, if I go into Spira, I can go into test runs and I will see the runs hopefully come in. And when they come in, they will appear here in real time and update into Spira. Oh, it's still running. And if you want to see what's going on, you can, I think, click on it. And yeah, you see what it's doing. So the build passed, test is running, deploy, okay. Okay, so it's running. And so while that's running, it will report back when it's finished into Spira, and it will do exactly the same thing with the test runs. So while that's running, let's see if we have any questions in the Q&A. So let's see. There is one question. So the first question, the bug Azure incident Spira will be bidirectional. You said correct. Yes, correct. So thanks for the question, Deval. The synchronization between incidents and bugs between Azure DevOps and Spira is fully bidirectional for new items and updates. And I will say, are these GitLab ID or Azure DevOps ID properties in Spira automatically, or they have to be created? Great question. You do not have to create them manually. They're automatic. The way those work is if you go into data synchronization, so I'll show you a little bit of how it works behind the scenes over here. Once you enable a plugin on a project, so if you look at this particular project, I've got GitLab set up for this one project. This is this, and you click on edit. Let me get that out of the way. You give it a name that's the caption. We're taking that name and we add the word ID. And what we do is on all the artifacts that exist, so that's these things here, like requirements and test cases, we basically add a special field. So if you go to say the incident, I go to this one here, that GitLab ID takes your caption, adds the word ID on it, and then when we automatically synchronize it, we're putting the ID in automatically. And also, just to be clear, because some people have asked this, that field is read only for non-admins. Now, I'm an admin for the demo today. I'm a sysadmin. It's easy for demoing with across different systems, so it's editable. Generally, you should not edit it because it's meant to be populated by the system. And if you delete that, it will actually then duplicate the item because that's our link to the GitLab or GitHub item or ADO item. So you generally shouldn't be changing it. And for regular users, they can't change it. So it's for safety. But that's a built-in field. It's automatically set up by the synchronization. And it's visible for us for two reasons. One is it helps us link them together. And two, it helps you find the item. Now, though I know there's the attachment, but this is also the ID value. And things like Jira, we have the prefix, like the project prefix. ADO, it has a slightly different format. So every different tool has a different format for that ID. Great, thank you, and thank you. Great. That was in the chat. Let's look at the Q&A box. Nice. Okay. How frequently do commits from GitHub are synchronized? There are some settings for the synchronization of the different. Well, first of all, the synchronization of the work items is every 2 or 3 minutes. For the code, let me get rid of the zoom window. It always seems to be right where I don't want it. So hide. Yes, so the configuration of how quickly we scan the code base is configurable. The source code, if I remember correctly, it's been a while actually. I think it's in here, or it might be at the system level. Let's see. I think it's general settings, code. Yeah, there we go. So this is the setting here. We right now this demo server is scanning the code base every 20 minutes. Now that might not be fast enough for you. You might want to make it every 1 minute or 2 minutes. So that's how fast we basically scan the source code repository. And right now with Git, we basically just we do a Git fetch, and we have effectively a bare repository that's cached in Spira, and we do that so we're not going to be overloading your GitHub account or your GitLab account, especially if you have like rate limiting and things like that. So we're trying to be very mindful of the other tools that we're integrating with, and so Spira has like a local bare repo that we synchronize. Good question. I think while I was talking, I think I saw it finish. Yes. So the GitLab repo ran its pipeline. We've now got on the GitLab side, we've got the test results that you can see here. It ran the same set of tests. Again, it's the same test on all different systems, but it ran in my GitLab pipeline this time. If I click on it, you can see there's the test result right here. It was actually part of a build. So it did run as part of a build. And we do have a traceability, so you can see which build that test ran on. There were tongue twister there. If I go to the release and I scroll down to the builds, you'll see we do have the build entry. There's the pipeline that ran. That's from the Git plugin. You can see there's the commit, and you can see what caused this build to run. Why did it run? It was this commit. That's because I made a change to that file. And there it is. Look at that. Now, the one thing to mention is if I had triggered it from the Spira app, you would not see this commit. It'd be empty because it was triggered manually from an API call to GitLab. So if you see a commit, there's no commit triggering it. That means it was triggered by the Spira app. If you see a commit, it means it was triggered by a code change. And it's really up to you. So that is the integration of all three tools. I've tried to cover it. It's a lot to show, and hopefully it all made sense. But basically, your teams can integrate work items, code, and pipelines. And that's for ADO, GitHub, and GitLab. But there's one more thing, which I mentioned in the original agenda. Value stream mapping or scaled agile, whatever you want to call it. What's the business need is this. Imagine that I am the CIO, and I've got these 40, and let's throw Jira in the mix too. So we've got Jira over here. We haven't demoed it today, but we do integrate with Jira. We can bring requirements in. We can push user stories. We've got integration at Jira too. So I've got my teams, and I've got 4 different projects working together for some major initiative at my company, and all the teams using their favorite tool chains. Maybe one's a third-party vendor. Maybe it's Deloitte or Accenture. They're doing some work using Azure. Maybe my internal teams use Jira. I've got some new serverless projects that are using GitHub and GitLab, and all this stuff has to happen for me to deliver some new functionality that I promised my board of directors at the end of Q1, which is in about 2 weeks or a week and a half. That's a big problem. How would I know what's going on? They've got their team backlogs. They're working in their favorite tools. Well, I would love to have a view of that. Now, in the different tools they synchronize with Spira, I do have all my requirements. So I can, at a granular level, I can see all my requirements here from Jira, all my requirements for Azure DevOps. I can see all my issues and stuff from GitHub, and if I've got requirements in Spira that are pushing to test cases, I've got that here. So I can see at a granular level everything in the 3 projects or the 4 projects. But that's not always that helpful. What I really want to know is, are my specific requirements that I care about, how are they doing? And so that's where, if you have SpiraPlan, you can now go into the artifact menu and you can create what are called capabilities. These are our value streams. And there's a grid view and there's a board view. Take your pick. And I can also set up milestones. So end of Q1, end of Q2, there's my Q1 release. And the capabilities that are really important, because this one capability you see, generate cross-system reporting, it's linked to 4 different user stories or requirements, and they are in different projects. If I click on it, and I'm going to click on the item, what you'll see is that this one capability at my program level is linked to requirements. In this case, I've only got Jira and Azure DevOps connected, but I can do the same thing with the other projects. And I can see here, what's the status? We're 50% done. One of my Jira requirements is completed. One of my ADO projects is completed, but 2 of my Jira projects are not completed. And if I go to this other dashboard here, we've got the same issue. Let me go in and let's add some other. If I create a new capability, I could even say, verifying mission, or new really important business need. Okay, save that. We can go into the overview. It's critical. It's end of Q1. I could then link that to GitHub. Maybe there's some requirements in GitHub that are being matched to a pipeline. I could add it to GitLab. What's over here? Right here, my GitLab. Okay, let's say it's one of these 2. Okay. And I want to add maybe something from Azure DevOps. It's these two, like that. So now I've got here my progress tracked, and these are all in progress. None of these are actually done. So my progress is actually 0%. So this is real. I'm in big trouble because nothing is actually finished here. If I go into that project and I change the status, so if I go into ADO and I find that user story, this one, and I go into ADO and I change that story and I make it completed in ADO because it's finished, development's done, testing is done, that's going to update my requirement, my program level requirement. So what that lets me do is I can then look at my program view, which is this view here, either the board or the grid, and I can see the progress. So right now, one requirement out of 6 is done, the other 5 are not done. And so as things change in my different systems, I can see for my specific set of needs across all those different teams, really how far away we are. In this case, would be a real issue. We're a week and a half away from the end of Q1, and maybe every single requirement is 90% done. So maybe it's okay, but maybe it's not. But this lets you take and slice and dice across those different teams. What are the business needs and map them to my business value? And that's basically value stream mapping. These are my value streams, and they're connected in to my different work streams in my different projects, letting me see, doesn't matter if it's ADO, GitHub, GitLab, Jira, Bitbucket, you name it. We can see an integrated view from a business lens, what's important. And if I go back to my dashboard right here, I can see the exact same thing. These are my 4 projects. This is what's on track, but this is what's on behind from their requirement view. If I switch to the capability view, I can now see, what's ahead, what's behind, just tracking my key business priorities, my capabilities. The other thing you can see on these views as well would be things like the test cases, the defects. All of this stuff is rolled up across the different systems. And if you go to the general view, I believe we also will show the builds as well. So we can even show project builds, and we've got a nice views there as well. So we've got lots of different views here to help you find what's going on. There's even a test case view if you want to see a testing view, and here are my different builds. So I can see my most recent builds and pipelines across the 3 different systems, GitHub, GitLab, and ADO in this case. I don't have to drill into each of the systems to find all this stuff. It's right here in one view. So I've got a single pane of glass that spans all those different systems, and all this data is real time. So with that, we're about 5 minutes before the end of the webinar. If there's any other questions, now is a good time to raise them. Okay, in the chat view. Question was, I know you weren't doing the demo for Jira Sync, but I'm assuming it works the same way as as ADO and GitHub. Yes, that's correct. The Jira Data Sync works the same way. Actually, it's nearer to ADO because it's got more artifact types. It's got requirements. It's got tasks. It's got incidents. So Jira is more like that. The Jira one is a bit more sophisticated because it can do more different directions of synchronization than the ADO one. And in fact, we're adding some functionality this month that's coming out in about another 2 or 3 weeks that's going to actually expand it even further. The ADO one is also, I think, more capable. So in terms of functionality, Jira one does the most, and then ADO and then GitHub and GitLab are a bit simpler on the work item side. The other difference is that Jira doesn't have pipelines. Now, I know that Bitbucket does. We can connect the code repository to a Bitbucket repo. We haven't yet built direct integration to Bitbucket pipelines. We just don't see it as much, but we certainly could if we have customers that need it. So the answer is yes, the Jira integration works the same as the work item part of the other ones we showed. Next question. The release ID that is used for the Spira plugin for the DevOps pipeline should not be used with a sprint, but rather a major version. Yes, that's correct. Typically, at least. It's up to you. In Azure DevOps, you can have a hierarchy of pipelines. So you can have releases in Spira that point to, have child sprints or iterations. Everything will synchronize from a work item standpoint in Azure DevOps with the iterations in ADO. They're also a hierarchy. So really it depends. Now, in terms of the reporting back, that would be whatever level you want to report it back against. Spira will roll the results up. So if you report a test result back against, say, an iteration, which is a lower level type of release in Spira, or a lower level item in ADO, we will roll the test results up to the parent release, as long as you make the parent release in Spira a major release and make the minor, the child items either a minor release or a sprint or a phase. So as long as you do that, it's okay. So you can mix and match. And we could certainly talk more about that offline as well. If you have more questions, feel free to log a support ticket or reach out to your account manager, and we can certainly help you. On the Q&A, let's see here. Okay, from Steve, we would like to sync Spira with ADO, but only for a subset of ADO work item types. Are there plans to select what item types to sync? Right now, you can sort of do it. You can fake do it, Steve, because if you don't map the incident types, it won't synchronize them. It will log warnings in the log, but it will work. So you can do that under the covers. Right now, our focus is on Jira. So for Jira, we're actually adding much more functionality around how to make things more granular about what types to synchronize. Jira is the focus for the next month or so. We've had quite a few inquiries come in about ADO recently, so we are gathering all the items that have come in to see how we can improve the ADO sync. So it's, I would say, Jira first, and then ADO, and then obviously GitHub and GitLab will be as well. So that's some of the prioritization we're doing. But yes, there is a current way of doing it, Steve, where you could just simply not map those types, and it would, again, if you don't mind the warnings in the log, it will actually do that for you. So it would work. I think that's all the questions that I see. We've got 2 minutes left. So I appreciate everyone attending the webinar today. I hope it was useful. It was a lot to demo live, and hopefully it wasn't too much clicking, and you understand what I was showing. There are webinars coming up. So just quickly, I will go to our company event to say the next webinar coming up. Thanks so much for attending today's webinar, and have a good rest of the day.